18. We went another mile, and then decided to camp for the night. There was still some daylight left, but nobody really wanted to use it. We were pooped from the scene at the dump and from our scare on the train trestle, but it was more than that. We were in Harlow now, in the woods. Somewhere up ahead was a dead kid, probably mangled and covered with flies. Maggots, too, by this time. Nobody wanted to get too close to him with the night coming on. I had read somewhere, in an Algernon Blackwood story, I think, that a guy's ghost hangs out around his dead body until that body is given a decent Christian burial. And there was no way I wanted to wake up in the night and confront the glowing, disembodied ghost of Ray Brower, moaning and gibbering and floating among the dark and rustling pines. By stopping here, we figured there had to be at least 10 miles between us and him. And of course all 4 of us knew there were no such things as ghosts, but 10 miles seemed just about far enough in case what everybody knew was wrong. Vern, Chris, and Teddy gathered wood and got a modest little campfire going on a bed of cinders. Chris scraped a bare patch all around the fire. The woods were powder dry, and he didn't want to take any chances. While they were doing that, I sharpened some sticks and made what my brother Denny used to call pioneer drumsticks, lumps of hamburger pushed onto the ends of green branches. The 3 of them laughed and bickered over their woodcraft, which was almost nil. There was a Castle Rock Boy Scout troop, but most of the kids who hung around our vacant lot considered it to be an organization made up mostly of pussies. Arguing about whether it was better to cook over flames or over coals, a moot point, we were all too hungry to wait for coals, whether dried moss would work as kindling, what they would do if they used up all the matches before they got the fire to stay lit. Teddy claimed he could make a fire by rubbing 2 sticks together. Chris claimed he was so full of shit he squeaked. They didn't have to try. Vern got the small pile of twigs and dry moss to catch from the second match. The day was perfectly still, and there was no wind to puff out the light. We all took turns feeding the thin flames until they began to grow stouter on wrist chunks of wood fetched from an old deadfall some 30 yards into the forest. When the flames began to die back a little bit, I stuck the sticks holding the pioneer drumsticks firmly into the ground at an angle over the fire. We sat around watching them as they shimmered and dripped and finally began to brown. Our stomachs made pre-dinner conversation. Unable to wait until they were really cooked, we each took one of them, stuck it in a roll, and yanked the hot stick out of the center. They were charred outside, raw inside, and totally delicious. We wolfed them down and wiped the grease from our mouths with our bare hands. Chris opened his pack and took out a tin Band-Aids box. The pistol was way at the bottom of his pack. He opened it and gave each of us a battered Winston. We lit them with flaming twigs from the fire and then leaned back, men of the world, watching the cigarette smoke drift away into the soft twilight. None of us inhaled because we might cough, and that would mean a day or 2 of ragging from the others. And it was pleasant enough to just drag and blow, hawking into the fire to hear the sizzle. That was the summer I learned how you can pick out someone who is just learning to smoke. If you're new at it, you spit a lot. We were feeling good. We smoked the Winstons down to the filters, then tossed them into the fire. "Nothing like a smoke after a meal," Teddy said. "Fucking A," Vern agreed. Crickets had started to hum in the green gloom. I looked up at the lane of sky visible through the railroad cut and saw that the blue was now bruising toward purple. Seeing that outrider of twilight made me feel sad and calm at the same time. Brave, but not really brave. Comfortably lonely. We tromped down a flat place in the underbrush beside the embankment and laid out our bedrolls. Then, for an hour or so, we fed the fire and talked. The kind of talk you can never quite remember once you get past 15 and discover girls. We talked about who was the best dragger in Castle Rock, if Boston could maybe stay out of the cellar this year, and about the summer just past. Teddy told about the time he had been at White's Beach in Brunswick, and some kid had hit his head while diving off the float and almost drowned. We discussed at some length the relative merits of the teachers we had had. We agreed that Mr. Brooks was the biggest pussy in Castle Rock Elementary. He would just about cry if you sassed him back. On the other hand, there was Miss Cody. She was just about the meanest bitch God had ever set down on the earth. Vern said he'd heard she'd hit a kid so hard 2 years ago that the kid almost went blind. I looked at Chris, wondering if he would say anything about Miss Simons, but he didn't say anything at all, and he didn't see me looking at him. He was looking at Vern and nodding soberly at Vern's story. We didn't talk about Ray Brower as the dark drew down, but I was thinking about him. There's something horrible and fascinating about the way dark comes to the woods. It's coming unsoftened by headlights or streetlights or house lights or neon. It comes with no mothers' voices calling for their kids to leave off and come on in now to herald it. If you're used to the town, the coming of the dark in the woods seems more like a natural disaster than a natural phenomenon. It rises like the Castle River rises in the spring. And as I thought about the body of Ray Brower and its light, or lack of it, what I felt was not queasiness or fear that he would suddenly appear before us a green and gibbering banshee whose purpose was to drive us back the way we had come before we could disturb its peace, but a sudden and unexpected wash of pity, that he should be so alone and so defenseless in the dark that was now coming over our side of the earth. If something wanted to eat on him, it would. His mother wasn't here to stop that from happening, and neither was his father, nor Jesus Christ in the company of all the saints. He was dead, and he was all alone, flung off the railroad tracks and into the ditch. And I realized that if I didn't stop thinking about it, I was going to cry. So I told a Lidio story, made up on the spot and not very good, and when it ended, as most of my Lidio stories did, with one lone American dog-face coughing out a dying declaration of patriotism and love for the girl back home into the sad and wise face of the platoon sergeant, it was not the white, scared face of some PFC from Castle Rock or White River Junction I saw in my mind's eye, but the face of a much younger boy, already dead, his eyes closed, his features troubled, a rill of blood running from the left corner of his mouth to his jawline. And in back of him, instead of the shattered shops and churches of my Lidio dreamscape, I saw only dark forest and the cindered railway bed bulking against the starry sky like a prehistoric burial mound.